tactics during the Vietnam War today, and you've got to look at the Viet Cong, which of course were the communists fighting in the south of Vietnam against the Americans. And they had to have different tactics, partly because they had different resources available to them. America had far more superior technology, more firepower than the Viet Cong, but they also had different motives. The Viet Cong were fighting for their own country. Many of the American soldiers were only there because they had to be there. They wanted to stop communism from spreading any further. And they wanted to kill and stop as many Viet Cong as possible. So first to the American tactics. Bombing was one of the big tactics that the Americans used because they could. They had superior air power, they had these amazing planes, missiles and all sorts, so they tried to bomb the heck out of the Viet Cong. Problem with that tactic, of course, is a lot of jungle in Vietnam. It's impossible to kill all of the Viet Cong from the air. The Viet Cong were using tunnels, we'll come to that in a little while, and perhaps most importantly, it's going to mean collateral. Now that means it will also hit things you don't want to hit, i.e. Vietnamese civilians. Now you might remember, if we reverse back to 1956, the Americans had stopped there being an election taking place because the Vietnamese people were going to vote for communism, or so they thought, and they were probably right. So what they needed to do was convince the Vietnamese people that actually capitalism is the right way forward. Well, dropping bombs on them and killing them is not going to be a good way to do this. It's just going to create more support for the Viet Cong. So the bombing did kill a lot of Viet Cong, a lot of communists, but it would have killed a lot of civilians as well. They didn't really solve things, but the Americans did a lot of it. What else did the Americans use? Search and destroy, which you can kind of substitute for find and kill. The Viet Cong stayed hidden a lot of the time. They knew if they were to fight the Americans in a fair fight, they were going to lose. So they hid when they thought they had an advantage. They came out of hiding, they attacked the Americans, then went back to hiding again. So the American tactic, search and destroy, was to find these Viet Cong, be it in tunnels, hidden in the jungle, or just intermingled with the villagers, because they didn't wear uniform most of the time. And then when they found them, to kill them. The problem with this is they would also kill innocent Vietnamese people. And often they would set fire to the villages that they'd just been and searched and destroyed. So it just created hatred for them again, more support for the Viet Cong. So yeah, they might have killed some Viet Cong, but every time they did this, they were probably creating more enemies than they were killing. So yeah, they also used helicopters, I should say. So if they found some Viet Cong, they'd scramble the helicopters, because the helicopters was a piece of technology that the Viet Cong didn't have, and it would get soldiers to the area they wanted them to be in very quickly. Strategic hamlets. So as I've mentioned, we've said about this before, the Viet Cong just went into the villages like ordinary people. You couldn't tell them from anybody else. So the Americans decided to get the villages and put them in guarded villages, effectively, with defences around them and soldiers guarding them and protecting them. And that sounds nice, doesn't it, really? But the Vietnamese village was like, I don't want to move from my home. Why do I want to go and live in some fortified place with soldiers and defences all around? I want to stay in my home here, thank you very much. And what about my paddy field where I make my living, where I grow my crops? It's not good to me coming to live in this strategic hamlet. So yes, it might have solved a bit of a problem, but again, probably created more enemies than it killed or stopped in this case. So there was that as well. You know, they also used chemical weapons. Because the Viet Cong were hiding in the jungles, they decided, the Americans, well, let's solve the problem by destroying a load of the jungles. That'll work. Haha, yeah, hee-haw, USA. But it didn't really do more good than harm. Yes, it got rid of the jungles, did Agent Orange. It was basically a weed killer, but it would kill anything, all the plants, so destroy the jungle. And napalm was like jelly, which burnt at a ridiculously high temperature. It would burn flesh down to the bone, and you couldn't get it off you if it touched you. That also would destroy the jungles that the Viet Cong were hiding in. But again, think of the Vietnamese. They're destroying their jungles, they're destroying their homes, they're destroying where they live, and lots of them got caught in the crossfire as well, of course. You know, Agent Orange caused horrible birth defects if any pregnant lady inhaled it, and health problems for them as well, and any other person. And napalm, as I said, burnt to the skin. So yeah, it's not good. Created more enemies than it actually prevented from doing what they want to do. Most of the American tactics created more enemies than they stopped. The Viet Cong, on the other hand, well, they used guerrilla warfare, sneaky tactics, you could think of it as. And the basis is just only fight when you've got an advantage. The rest of the time, go and hide. We might see that as being cowardly, but actually the Viet Cong had no chance fighting America in a fair fight. So they used traps, horrible traps. Their most famous is a punji trap, which was a pit, spikes put in the pit, usually bamboo sticks, cheap, easily available, sharpened to a point, covered in poo, covered with leaves or something. American stands on it, foot goes on, terrible infection, can't carry on fighting. You know, some of these traps, and I might get a chance to show you a video, so horrific. You know, there was like rolling beams. You know when you go to like a soft play when you're a little kid and you squeeze through those like rollers? Well, them, but spikes in the rollers and on the floor. So if you stepped in, if you can imagine what I'm saying, you're walking along, you stepped on these leaves which were covering the trap, you're going to go through the rollers, and as you roll, the spikes are going to go all into your body, wherever their spikes happen to be. Horrific. And American soldiers would have died from those things. Once you're in, you're rolling. There's no stopping you once you're down. So there was also tunnels. You know, not just like little tunnels. We're talking whole underground tunnel systems. And the Viet Cong, Vietnamese people, are smaller in stature than Americans. So they dug these tunnels purposefully to be really thin and small. So even if the Americans found them, they'd find it hard to get in. And there would be booby traps and all sorts, which if the Viet Cong were in the tunnels, they'd know where the booby traps were and they'd avoid them. The Americans, they didn't know. So yeah, the tunnels helped the Viet Cong stayed hidden. And then to supply themselves, there was the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was a route from North Vietnam to South Vietnam, which also went into Laos and Cambodia. So those were two nations that ran alongside Vietnam, which America had no right to invade at any point. And so the Americans and the South Vietnamese army couldn't stop the Ho Chi Minh Trail, certainly in large parts, because they were going in other countries. There were secret hidden trails, but of course, you know, intelligence, spies and so on knew where the trails were. And the Americans did bomb those bits of the trail that they could get away with bombing incessantly, all the time, but they could never stop it. And they might just alter the trail a little bit, go a little different route and try to avoid the bombing at different times. So it wasn't like a standard path or a road or anything. It was routes through the jungle which would bring supplies from the north to the south, which was out of an area that the Americans could stop the trail from operating. So yeah, there you go. There's the tactics. The Americans, overwhelming force, power and might, kill loads of Viet Cong, and they did. But they probably created more enemies in doing so. The Viet Cong, sneaky, hide. When the Americans are at a disadvantage, attack, go back and hide again. And there you have it, tactics of the Vietnam War.